So that's how I found out about it. I heard about it years ago from them at a church picnic and thought, well, when will I ever have 3 weeks to travel? And lo and behold, a few years later, I did have 3 weeks to travel. So I studied and lived in Cuenca, Ecuador for 3 weeks, and I lived with an Ecuadorian family. And we studied at this school called Estudio Stockert in Cuenca. And just because it was part of my sabbatical, I wanted you to know that I did my homework. So this is what I did. Sometimes people ask, "Oh, did you speak Spanish before you went?" Yes, I studied Spanish for many years in high school, junior high school, college. I minored in it. But after I graduated from college, I really just stopped speaking it. And over the years, I just felt more and more like I wanted to refresh my learning. And so I started even before I went on this program on my own to study and to try to refresh. So it wasn't out of nowhere that I went and did this, because you'll see that I actually preached in chapel in Spanish. So it wasn't a miracle of 3 weeks or I was suddenly fluent in Spanish. The second half of the trip, I went to Medellin, Colombia. The reason that I went to Medellin is because we have our mission partners from this church there, Elizabeth and Don Sundek, who many of you know, who live on the campus of the Biblical Seminary there. And Elizabeth used to be the president of it, and they're still affiliated in many ways. So I spent some time with Elizabeth and Don, and I sat in on 2 graduate level classes. I preached in the chapel in Spanish. And you'll see one of my favorite things I got to do was I socialized with some of the students. We went out and they were very excited to talk about theology. And we visited a lot of significant locations. My family and I did. So we'll start in Cuenca. Here is Cuenca. And this is where it is on the map. Cuenca, Ecuador, is about 8,000 feet in the air, in the mountains. It is very high up. Ecuador. Oh, also, I am not an expert on Ecuador or Colombia. However, I wanted to give us some context for where we are. Again, I did study some Latin American history in college, but that was many years ago. So I had to refresh, and I may not know the answers to all of your questions about Ecuador and Colombia. But Ecuador is a representative democratic republic. Its name literally means equator. You can see here its economy is based on exports of commodity. And yes, Panama hats, we will see. Panama hats are not from Panama. They are from Cuenca, Ecuador. And they are now made all over the world in factories and things, but if you want a real authentic Panama hat, you will get it from Cuenca. The currency is the American dollar, which made travel so easy there because there's no calculating. And so the main territories of Ecuador were once inhabited by a variety of indigenous people. This was something that was new to me. I just always assumed the Inca were everywhere all the time, which was wrong. The Incan Empire, Ecuador wasn't incorporated into the Incan Empire until the 15th century. So it wasn't Incan, it was a variety of different indigenous people who still lived there. It was then colonized by Spain in the 16th century. Then they had independence from Spain in Gran Colombia, which is, I think it was what we now see as Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador. But then some stuff happened, which is glossed over here. It was a sovereign state in 1830, and then they had many dictatorships, etc. And they returned to democracy in 1979, and they adopted a new constitution in 2008. It's a population of 17.8 million. Most people are mixed indigenous and European ancestry, but there are large minorities of other ethnic backgrounds. Spanish is the official language, but the government officially recognizes 13 native languages as well. Ecuador is famous for its ecology. They have many endemic plants and animals. It's ecologically diverse. So they have, in this little teeny tiny country, it's a coast. They have the highlands of the Andes Mountains, they have the Amazon, and the Galapagos Islands are part of Ecuador as well. Ecuador, it was my impression, and also based on this, that Ecuador is somewhat forward-thinking on ecology, on the rights of nature. So they were the first in the world to recognize legally enforceable rights of nature in their constitution. And some of the news that just happened in the past couple weeks was there's some indigenous tribe whose name I don't remember who was native to a section of the Amazon, and they are getting their land returned to them. It's something like 18,000 acres. They're returning the land to allow those people who were forcibly removed for certain reasons, and they're being allowed to return back there. So our first stop was in Quito, which is the capital city. This is my daughter Avery. She went with me for this portion of the trip. We traveled together. You'll notice it's cloudy a lot. Sometimes we think, oh, South America, tropical, hot, warm. I don't know where that impression comes from, but it's not right. Because Quito is also in the mountains. Quito and Cuenca are very mild. They're cloudy a lot. The days would be sort of cloudy in the morning, a little bit of rain sometimes. Sometimes we get some sunshine. This is one of the first, we went on a tour. This is one of the first places we saw the Plaza de Independencia. It's this symbol of executive power. As far as I can remember, this house with the flag is it currently still the president's house, Diana, or was it?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a symbol. Yes, yeah. There's been some stuff, but and this is a famous monument. There's some symbology around it that it's too much to get into, but this is about the first cry of independence from the Spanish monarchy. We did a lot of tours of architecture. This is one of the many, many churches, cathedrals we went to. And one of the fun things that we did is we went to the equator, El Mitad del Mundo. This thing here with me in my giant shoes is, giant shoes are there, and you get to step into them, and you're on either side of the equator. And, one of the things that was super interesting, that one of our tour guides told us, was that one of the groups of native peoples knew they were in the center of the world for a very, very long time. And they had it marked, and they knew where they were. And then later, Europeans, such as the French, came and said, hey, we'd like to know where the equator is. And they did their own homework, and they placed the equator somewhere slightly different, and there's a French museum there. But then scientists came with more scientific instruments and were in the mountains and measuring and doing their science things, and they figured out, oh, whoops, where the native people put the equator is where the equator is. So there is a museum. We went to two museums that are on the equator, one called Intiñán here, and then another one I don't remember the name of. This one is more cultural. The other one was more scientific. They were both really interesting. And this one is a lot more about culture. We'll look at some other pictures, but one of the things at the scientific museum that our guides talked about that I thought was really interesting was, why do maps have north at the top? Right, why? We don't know. We do know. North has been at the top consistently for about the past few hundred years, but in space, there's not an up and down. It's how we conceive of it as humans. So different cultures historically put other orientations than north at the top of the map in order it sort of identifies who they looked up to. So if you look at old Christian maps, east is at the top towards where they thought the Garden of Eden was, with Jerusalem at the center. And the reason we have north at the top is because of a sense of superiority with the colonialists. The colonizers, European, put north at the top. So Europe is at the top. And at this museum, the guide suggested we reorient our way of looking at the world sideways. And when you look at the world sideways, North and South America are neighbors instead of us. being on top. And I think that makes us more neighborly than thinking of us always being above our southern neighbors. Here's I found this on the internet. It's a space picture that's just helping us think about that for a second. This is at the Indigenous Museum that's at the equator. That's a giant spider that he showed us. And then this is just an example of the inside of, it's a recreation, just like if you go to a historical museum here, they have recreations of how people lived in the olden days. That's a recreation of how people may have been
Where is
living.
the spider?
The spider is in the box right there. It's a giant Goliath spider, I think. I had to curate my pictures because I have just hundreds of pictures, so you're just getting a little sample of what we learned at this museum.
Is it poisonous?
I think it eats birds. I think all spiders are a little venomous, but I don't think they bite humans. So this is at the Scientific Museum. This is Jeff and our guide shaking hands across the equator. There's Diana. And this is all of us at the equator, our group that we traveled with. So some facts about Cuenca. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That means it's been designated by the UN to be of educational, scientific, and cultural value, this preservation of heritage around the world. It was originally occupied by the Cañari people, and then the Inca, and then the Spanish. One thing to know about the indigenous people here and everywhere, they were organized, they had agriculture, and they had ceramics. It wasn't just some empty land where the Europeans came in. There were an organized people with culture and everything there. The current population of Cuenca is around 500,000. There is a large expat community there, especially retired Americans. They live mostly in this section of Cuenca called Gringolandia. I had a tour guide. Avery and I ended up going on a tour on our own with a tour guide, and he and I were chatting. And if you look up what the expat population is in Cuenca, you'll see a smaller number than this, but his estimate was that it was around 20,000 people moved during the pandemic. One of the things I liked about the Cuenca tour guides is they're licensed by the government and they know a lot of things. They're very well educated and they know their stuff. Cuenca is known for the beauty of the city, and it is famous for its Panama hats. So I stayed with a host family, my daughter and I did. So this is our host family, Priscilla, Diego, and Martina. Martina's 11, or she might be 12 now. This is a view from a tourist spot called Turri of the city. The city roofs are, by law, they need to be this red color, and it keeps this beautiful consistency across the city. This is more view from Turri. Avery's drinking a special drink they gave us called Canela. No, that's Canelazo. Sorry, Diana. Canelazo. Canela is cinnamon. Yes.
How old is your daughter?
She's 13.
How old?
13.
Okay.
I forgot to get a picture of my other teacher. This is my one teacher, Valeria. On our last day of class, she and I went out to eat. And I do not remember what that food is called, but it was delicious, and that hot chocolate. These are the steps we had to walk up every day to get to school. School is up at the top on the left. You can't see it there. The las escalinatas or las carreritas. And then that's just a little note to myself because I had to tell the cab driver every day where I was going. We went to this museum, Museo Pumapungo, which is a museum of culture and patrimony or cultural heritage. We weren't really supposed to take pictures inside, so this is a snuck picture of, I think it's Incan, but an indigenous seat. Maybe like they suggested that maybe council members might have sat in chairs like that. And then there was birds. There was like a little zoo with birds, and Avery likes birds. This was an excavated portion of what was probably an Incan site where they may have brought women to teach them Incan culture. That was one of the ways the Incas spread their culture once they conquered, was to train the women how to be Incas, and then they would send them out. But as everyone, and it was probably also an important site before the Incas to the people that lived there before. And as colonizers loved to do, the Incas then built on top, and then this on the right-hand side is a Jesuit high school. It's not anymore, but it was a Jesuit high school, so then when the Jesuits came, they thought, let's build here too. And one of our guides went to high school there, and he said he had no idea while he was in high school that those ruins were there. We took cooking classes. So here we're making something. They are not umitas. What are they, Diana? They are umitas. Well, they're not umitas because they have alcohol in them. There's some other name because they put like a splash of vodka or something in them. But we're making these things called.
Is that why you're laughing?
No. We're making these things called umitas, which are a lot like tamales. They're a sweet corn dough that's then steamed in these leaves. But the corn is different. The corn that they use for this, you think of corn on the cob for the summertime. You'll see, I've got a photo later on where you'll see the size of the grains, but the corn is more like this, and it gets run through a grinder. It gets mixed with different stuff, and then it's made into these umitas. Another day we made something called locura de papas, which is a soup, a potato soup that is very authentic to this area. They eat it a lot. You eat it with a sauce called ají, which sadly we cannot make here because it is made with something called tomate de árbol, which we can't get here despite trying. And I brought Martina. This is the daughter from my family because Avery didn't want to go, so I took a different daughter to cook. We got to take Latin dance classes, salsa, and some other things. So this was the woman in the middle with the crazy, making the crazy face was our teacher. It was really fun. Another thing we did was go to the hot springs. I put this picture in here because this was something I had never experienced. They have these hot boxes. They're very, very hot. Steam. And then they open them and they dump cold water on you 3 times in very specific intervals, and it's terrible. And I got very, very sick. I probably would have gotten sick anyway, but I now forever have I associate like being very ill with doing this hot spring. We took a tour, so Avery and I, as I said, I got very sick. I spoke about that in a sermon one time about the doctor coming and everything. So we missed this tour with the group to El Pajazo, and so I hired a tour guide to take us a different day. These are, alpacas. And they are wild alpacas, and Avery just really wanted to see alpacas, and we thought, well, we might not see any alpacas. This is our one chance, and then there's alpacas everywhere, but these ones are wild. They live up in the mountains. Our guide told us that alpacas are not endemic to Ecuador. The Incas brought them. They can only go up to a certain height. They live high in the mountains, but there's a certain height where that's as far as they go, and then they don't go farther. And they live wild. I mean, the Incas came like 500 years ago, so they've been there a long time.
What is the one to the left? That first down.
It's an alpaca. Yeah, it's just a different color. They come in different colors. So this is about 14,000 feet high. We're in the Andes Mountains. Yeah, we hiked a little bit, but not a lot because it's hard. And this is our feet are very wet. That's why we're showing our feet. This was our guide, and he knew a lot about the plants and animals, so he did a sort of animal tour for us. One of the things that Cuenca's famous for is ceramics, and so we visited a ceramics studio, and this ceramicist pioneered this way of making the black ceramics in the back. You can see some examples. It has something to do with how he smokes the clay. I don't remember exactly, but and so this was his studio there. and I got to make something with a lot of help. Avery and I on our own went to this Aboriginal art museum, and it was very cool. And you can see they've been making ceramics in this area for thousands and thousands of years. So these are just some examples of the ceramics we saw. Avery and I both had to eat gluten-free for medical reasons, and it was very easy in Ecuador to do that. But we also found, I always look up where can we get something special that's gluten-free. We found this gluten-free, it wasn't totally gluten-free, but this bakery, Matthews, it had gluten-free bagels, gluten-free bread, the best I've ever eaten in the whole entire world. I'll have to go back to Cuenca just to eat them. And Martina came with us. We visited El Museo de las Conceptas, which is a convent. It still is a working convent, but the part that's the museum, the nuns don't come into during the time when people visit, and the part we were in, I think, used to be the hospital wing. We got to go horseback riding in old hacienda. Avery's actually knows how to ride, so it was not her speed. I don't know how to ride, so it was fun. We did a visit with an indigenous community. The women you see that are American, that are in the outfits, they were invited to put those outfits on. They didn't just go like, oh, let's wear these Native people's outfits. The girls grabbed them and put them on there. So we saw them, they demonstrated some of their dances. They showed us how they make, this is barley, I think that's Thomas, it's David. They showed us how they grind barley. This has been a long tradition in this particular group. You make this barley drink that is very nutritious that they would drink at breakfast. Our guide said even he, and I don't know how old he was, like 50, even he, when he was little, would drink this drink. It's slowly going out of fashion in terms of people drinking this barley drink as their breakfast, but it is something that the women, the indigenous women of this community, it used to be and may still be considered essential before they get married, that they know how to make this. Yeah.
Is that a dog?
It is a dog. So a couple things. There's random stray dogs all over the place. This one was just the neighbor's dog that happened to want to visit this event, and they all knew him by name, and I forget what his name was, but he decided it was really important that he be with us. This is one of the oldest churches in that, or maybe the oldest church in that area where we were. The people there still use it. It's not every day. It's for a special Easter. Maybe somebody's getting married. They go, when I went and walked up around the chancel, and because they had sort of the communion element, the paten and the chalice up, and there was liturgy up there from Easter, so that was kind of cool. And as I said, alpacas everywhere. These were just some alpacas tied in a field where in the place we were visiting. And so Avery is magical with animals, and she made friends with these alpacas. It's too fun. So we visited a place called Iquique and then some other indigenous ruins, and these are some other indigenous ruins nearby. That these predate the Inca. It was likely an area of ritual cleansing and worship. And so this was probably what would have turned into a shower with the rain. And see those divots in the wall? What do you think those are for? Yeah. This is one of my favorite things. It's these divots in the wall. They would put the herbs and things that they might use to wash their hair and their bodies or smell good, or maybe it was for some ritual portion of the cleansing in there. And I just love it when we travel and we're like, people are people all the time. We're the same. So we build our showers. We have little things in the wall where we put our soap. And this is Ingapirca. It is half Inca, half somebody else, indigenous ruins. It's a field. People were farming there for a long time. And then there became more of an interest in reclaiming heritage. And I think it's the town government here reclaimed this space. And they asked people to bring the rocks back. People had been collecting the rocks for farming and like building walls and things. So people brought rocks back, they've excavated, and they're rebuilding this little thing here that's behind Avery and I. They have people who know things, who are doing their best to try to rebuild what this site may have looked like. We did a little hiking to get to Ingapirka, so that's just a little shot of that. That little guy there is just a kid with a mask on. But it's a hat you can just buy around, but it is actually, I made a note to myself, it says I knew I would forget, let me see. Aya Uma. Let's go back to it's an important spirit guide, indigenous spirit guide who's double-faced, and the details of which I really don't know. But you'll see later that he shows up in, so this is just a kid, but whose parents bought him this thing. And people wear ponchos everywhere, unironically. It is very cold and it's nice to have a poncho. You'll see later there's a dancer that has the same mask on. And I'm not the best ambassador for what the meaning of this is, but it's important to know that it has cultural significance. And this character often opens the dance. He's one that orients, one that organizes and guides, and has two faces, so he's never surprised. And then there's lots more to it. It's really interesting. Also, the Catholic Church, when they came in, named him Diablo Uma. They made him the devil, but he is not the devil. He is an indigenous symbol. This church is super interesting. It was on our way back from Ingapirka. It's called the Sanctuary of the Virgen de Rocio, the Virgin of the Mist. Sorry, Diana, I keep looking at you. I'm pretty sure it's mist. And it's built into the rock. So if you look back behind our magical Jesus with his flowing light, that is rock. So it's built into the natural rock. And the story is that around the 1900s, they were experiencing a drought. And a priest went up to the top of this hill to pray and pray and pray and pray. And then it started to rain. And the people said, we need to build a cathedral here, or a sanctuary. They built this beautiful church in the rock. And it was active. People were there coming in to pray. One of the museums we visited was the Museo del Sombrero Homero Ortega, which is the name of the person who founded this hat factory. I took a photo of this little informational panel because it shows that the native peoples were wearing hats of similar nature way, way back before the Spanish showed up. And so there is a long history of hat wearing. They're on the equator, it makes sense. They're sun protection. And the classic hats are hand woven, and this is how they start out. And this company still contracts with women who live in various places to hand make these hats. And they can range in price from $30 to several $1,000 because they can make them very quickly or they can make them very slowly, and it could be months and months and months of work. I had to choose what I put in here. They have presses. There's these big vats where they color the hats. They have presses with lots of different shapes in order to make, they don't just make hats, they make beach hats and all kinds of other hats. And one of the things about the indigenous communities is each of them has their own dress, native clothing that they wear, and they all wear different hats. And what I heard was that a lot of that was actually imposed by the Spanish, so they could tell the difference between the different tribes. But many of them have kept that. They've adopted it. And you will see people walking around Cuenca wearing these just as their regular clothes when they identify with their people. We visited a place that makes chocolate. Chocolate is very important to Ecuador. This company, their story was that a lot of the Ecuadorian chocolate, the best, was getting exported, and they really wanted to try to keep some of the best chocolate in Ecuador, and they had to do that by paying a lot more for the chocolate in order to incentivize the producers to keep it in the country. And their chocolate is very, very good, but Avery's making that face because the samples were very, very tiny, as you can see on the napkin there. We bought some more to take home, but we thought, oh, we're getting chocolate. We went to the Museum of Modern Art with Martina and Priscilla. That's one of the special things we did with them. One of our favorite things we did was a trip to the Amaru Zoo up in the mountains. The picture on the right is the view of the valley from up in the top. Now, my Spanish teacher told me this story about the zoo, so we're going to just assume she knew the story about the zoo. She said it got started because there was a couple of people that had some lions. And that was not great. And the government took the lions and they needed a place to put them. And so they built a place for these lions, and then that has turned into this zoo. The zoo has an emphasis on ecology. A lot of the animals are rescue animals. They have a big Andean condor there that I didn't have a good picture of, that is a rehabilitated Andean condor. It's pretty fun. But it's like a hike you just wander this trail through the woods, and then there's different, it's not like our zoos where there's wide paths. So it's very natural, and that's really super cool. All right, we had our farewell dinner with Andy and dance. Oh, here you can see him. Ioma, right there, leading the dance. So this is our group, and then a group of dancers. They did representative dances of a number of different indigenous peoples, and a lot of them were storytelling dances, and so she's carrying a water jug, and it had something to do with weddings. And then we had a special farewell lunch with the family. One of the things that is special to Cuenca and areas around it is that guinea pig or cuy is one of their special foods. When we went to the museum at the I've got Spanish and English mixed up in my head. In the equator, we saw inside the representative indigenous home a section that was marked off for and they had guinea pigs in there because before the Spanish came and they brought with them larger animals, one of the main sources of protein, of animal protein, was guinea pigs. It's like rabbits. They're very easy to raise. And also, they said that they make good guard animals because they squeak if anyone comes in the house. So Priscilla arranged for us to have guinea pig. It's a special, it's not something like you make at home. It's a special event where it's roasted. And then it's like sort of communal thing, like we all eat off the same turkey, right, for Thanksgiving. You all eat off the same guinea pig. It's very special. And those on the left-hand side is the corn. Remember, I was talking about how big the corn kernels are. And potatoes are essential, like food too, really important food. And here we are in Medellin. So we went to Medellin second. These are some facts. It's a huge city. I did not really mentally prepare for the fact that we were going from a tiny city to a massive city. When we first got there, I said, "Oh, this is a really big city." And I've lived in LA and all over the place, but it was the pace is different. It's the second largest city in Colombia after Bogota. Here's just a few facts. Again, I'm not an expert on Colombia, but I did want to share some context. It is also home to many indigenous people. The Spanish colonization started in 1499. They achieved their independence from Spain in 1819. There was a period of armed conflict in the 1960s to the 1990s. And since 2005, there's been a lot of improvement. Sometimes when I would tell people that I was going to Medellin, they were sort of stuck in the 90s, and they said, "Oh, it's so dangerous there." it's really not. It's like any big city. You have to be careful, but it's, if you're in the main areas, not at night, we were very comfortable, we felt very safe. Colombia has the highest biodiversity in the world per square mile because the Amazon rainforest is there. They also have highlands, grasslands, and desert. And it's the only country in South America with coastlines on the Atlantic and the Pacific. Yeah. So we stayed at the local seminary of Colombia where the Sendecs live. And I took a picture of the door because it says Shalom in Hebrew. That's a view of the campus from our building where we were. So you can see it's a collection of small buildings. It's been there for, I don't remember, 50, 60 years, a while. The Sendecs have been with it for 40, I think. This is Don and Elizabeth Sendek. They are very busy people who do a lot of traveling. So Don had dinner with Todd and I a couple of times, but Elizabeth was off working. She came home. We spent some time with her. We had a meal with her. We went to church with them, and then had lunch with them. And then they had to go do something else. They were going to lead a retreat somewhere. This was one of the more interesting parts of our tour. So while we were there, what I did is I booked a number of tours around sort of cultural and natural areas of importance. This area is really important. It's called Comuna 13. You can see it's built way up into the hills. And it has a long history, which I didn't really understand. I still don't fully understand. But during the years of upheaval in the agricultural areas, people would come into the cities like Medellin and build into the hills. They would just find stuff and build, which is why it looks haphazard like that. One of the things I learned is that the U.S. has some responsibility in this, in that they were very active in protecting U.S. business interests in the countryside from the 20s on. And a lot of the reason, and there was a lot of violence that the U.S. participated in, and so a lot of the reason why the peasants and the farmers were moving into the mountains was this violence. So they would move into the cities, into the mountains here. And unfortunately, where Comuna 13 was the perfect highway for narco trafficking. So when narco trafficking started, people like Pablo Escobar started running drugs through this area, and it was very, very dangerous. And then in the early 2000s, the government decided to clean it up, and that was also very violent. The tactics that the government used to clean up the area was very violent. So this man here was our tour guide, and part of his mission in running these tours is to show not only, to tell the real story of Comuna 13, so people who come, and one of their main businesses now is tourism. And they bring people through. There's tour guides everywhere, but this is like a vetted guy. And to tell the real history, so the story doesn't get lost, but also to show how this whole area has been turned around. And it is full of life, it is vibrant, it is safe enough that you can go there and walk around. The food is amazing, the art is amazing, there's dancers there that just do the street dance to make their living. And so there are people here who are really, like, one of the things that they do is to introduce tourists like me to this area as a symbol kind of rebirth, of hope, of how really it was just a terrible, awful, one of the most dangerous places in the world. And now it's this very vibrant arts community. Our tour guide here had said that he grew up in this area. He's a native of Comuna 13. And when he was a little kid, this is a big area of, I don't know, 500,000 people. It's a lot of people. And he could not go from where he lived in Comuna 13 to his grandmother's house in a different section because it was just not safe to make travel across that neighborhood. It's not that big a neighborhood. And now it's just completely different. It's known for its art. So we went on what was billed as a graffiti tour. But when they say graffiti, they really mean murals. This was one of the murals we saw, and you can see it. The girl has a keyhole in her head, and there's the birds coming out of the cages. It's very representative of this. We're all the same under the skin, and this idea of knowledge being unlocked and freedom and beauty. Pablo Escobar is a controversial figure. So you may see there's a lot of new shows on Netflix and stuff about him. He is he's just a tragedy intertwined with the whole history of Colombia in terms of his drug running, but their relationship is complicated because a different neighborhood there, he built the whole neighborhood. He built housing for poor people, so it's just like super complicated. We took a tour of the city. That's a little rebuild of a historical colonial area, just like if we go to Colonial Williamsburg or whatever and you want to see what it might have looked like there. That's what it might have looked like. There's a view of Medellin right there. You can see the city behind us. Up at the top of Medellin is a place called Parque RV. Oh, I forgot something interesting about Comuna Trece. One of the things that the government did as reparations was ask the people, what do you need? They needed escalators. They built escalators on the side of the mountains. Because if you think about it, if you live way, the poorest people live way at the top. There's no way to get down. How can you participate in the economy? And so they built escalators and a what are those things called? Aerial tramway. So you can get up and down the mountain now much more easily. The tramway goes all the way to the very top of the mountains to this park called RV Park. It's a huge preserve at the top of the city. Thousands and thousands of acres. We only spent an hour there. But you can camp there, you can hike there. It's pretty interesting when you take the tramway up the city. You're in the city, and then you go over these comunas, these favelas that were sort of haphazardly built, like what we saw. And then it turns into farms in the mountains above the city, and then you get to this park. It's pretty beautiful. I preached in chapel. Todd did not want to take pictures while I was preaching in chapel. He felt like that would be rude, so this is me outside the chapel. We visited a coffee plantation. And this one was trying to preserve the historic and more natural, organic ways of doing things. Again, we were invited to wear these outfits. We didn't just decide, let's be coffee pickers. They wanted us to, part of the tour was to see what it's like to actually pick coffee, what it's like. It's really hard. And those are coffee bushes behind my son. This is my son, AJ. And you can see you wear a hat, each of these things has their own function in terms of being out in the weather in order to pick. And there's AJ pouring some stuff in to take the shells off the outside of the coffee beans. We got to ride some horses, and boy, is it scary to ride these horses. These are mules, some of them. Avery's the only one that got a horse because she's the only one that knows how to ride. They go up these narrow pathways. And out here, this is just outside the city. We went through a tunnel in a mountain, and then we were in this farmland. And on the sides of the highways, there are horses tied up for rent because you still can't always get stuff down from the top of the mountain because there's not always roads up there. And so people still have their horses for rent where you can rent. But this was part of our tour, was to ride these horses, and it was scary. We had coffee. We learned all about coffee and how to taste coffee and how special coffee is. And this was a special lunch, a little sort of similar to those amicas we talked about in Ecuador, but I think these are banana leaves. And there's meat and there's chicken and rice in there, and that would have been the traditional kind of lunch that the coffee pickers would have eaten, back in the olden days. We went hiking in the mountains here to a waterfall. They put in the information to bring a change of shoes because our feet would get wet. And I was like, nah, how wet are our feet going to get? I don't think we need a change of shoes. Oh, most of the hike was in the stream. In the stream, and it was fine. I didn't mind being wet in the stream and scrambling over rocks. It was very strenuous and exciting. But we saw all the beautiful foliage and learned some about the nature there. We went to this tourist area called Guatape, which is where those umbrellas are. It is a mainly tourist town. It's a big tourist attraction that has a lot of shopping. It's like one of those little towns that's been built up to look like an old-timey town. So you can go and you can shop and eat and drink coffee. And one of the things that's nearby is this thing called La Piedra, or the rock, the stone. It's enormous. And what we learned is some guy, like 60, 70 years ago, thought, oh, this would make a good tourist attraction, bought this rock. It is still in his family, and you can hike up it. That sort of lacing up the side is, I forget, it's like 700 steps. We did it. It was a lot. And then the same thing here, this beautiful water feature. A company thought, we should flood this and make it a recreation area. So they moved the whole town and then flooded all that. There's town under there, and we took a boat tour, and you can see the top, the cross from the cathedral. I know. And then I spent time with students. That is just juice. Do not worry. It is not a giant alcoholic beverage. And so at the seminary, there was a variety of ages. They go right after high school to whatever whatever they think they're going to do professionally. So if you think you're going to be in theology, you go right to seminary, and you do your undergrad and your grad work together. But however, some of them come back and they're doing their doctorates, they're doing other things. And they bought me, it's raspado, I think. It's a shave ice. And so they were really excited to buy me this shave ice, and I didn't have the heart to be like, well, gosh, we've got like a lot of shave ice in Hawaii and other places. It's very special to them. There's these guys on the street that like grind the ice. And then we went and we had just coffee and juice and snacks, and we played board games, Jenga and Uno and some other stuff. And they were super interested. The group that came was a group that wanted to talk about theology. They wanted to hear about my dissertation project. They wanted to talk just about theology in general. And so that was pretty interesting and challenging to try to talk about theology in Spanish. And so my Spanish was good enough that when we were chatting and they were talking to me directly, I could understand and engage. But when we started playing the game and they were really fast, I could play the game, but I didn't always know what was going on. And then Medellin is famous for its flowers, so we were there. We just happened to be there for the Festival of the Flowers. It's a thing that happens over the whole city. This is inside a mall, so you can see it's 4 stories high, 3 stories high, all flowers. And then we went to the, the botanical gardens. We didn't really get to see the botanical gardens themselves because it was set up for this flower festival, so we mainly saw flowers. And then we went home, and that is my dog. So he stayed, while we were in Ecuador, he was home with my husband and my son, and then he stayed with the Murphys. You guys know Greg and Kelly Murphy, and he spent time with them. So he was not abandoned, but he sure was happy that we came home. Are there any questions? I know that was really fast. Things you want to know? Yeah.
Let's go back to standing on the equator.
Yeah.
We all drain our bathtubs counterclockwise.
Yes.
And the south hemisphere, they go clockwise. That means they don't turn at all. How do you drain your bathtub when you're on the equator?
So at that museum, they do all of these things to demonstrate that, but we learned secretly they're mainly manufactured for the tourists to be excited about. Do you remember exactly what they said about the draining in Smith, right?
Yeah, they said that with a little push, they could get it to do
Yeah.
what they wanted there on the equator.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is, as you said, theater.
Yeah, for the tourists. Oh, I got to balance an egg on the equator as well. And I actually got a passport stamp and a certificate for balancing my egg. Yes.
In Point Castle?
Yeah.
The 20,000 people who came during,
Yeah.
during the pandemic, how were they received? I mean,
Yeah, that's a really good question. I asked that tour guide about that, and it's mixed because they are boosting the economy, but they also are driving up prices. So the more people that come, the more expensive it gets. That have money, American money, the more expensive it gets to live there. I also, this is just my impression. I did not get the impression that the Americans in general were making an effort to really become part of Coinca so much as stay in their own little community. And I mean, there's good things and bad things about that too. So I think it's really mixed reaction. Jeff, did you have any? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you have a better answer to that?
No, I think your answer is correct. Of course, there's the whole gamut of people who do embrace the culture and want to become part of the community, want to become really more Ecuadorian and establish connections and be part of the church and be part of the community. But that's not the general impression of Americans there. Yeah. And truly, there were some who took it upon themselves to do some of the same protests that we saw here around masks in the U.S. down there, which was really badly received.
Yeah.
You mean the mask for the pandemic or
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Masks
What do you
for the
mean? What
pandemic.
did they do?
They made signs, went out and did a loud protest against wearing masks.
Okay.
In a society where solidarity is a very strong value and that public health was really sending the other message.
Yeah.
Was that region impacted as much?
Oh yeah, the whole world. Yeah, for sure. And what I gathered from the classes and speaking with the teachers, there is really a sense of community mindedness. You can see it in things like the rise of nature. It's a young country in terms of the birth rate and people having babies, and so it was my impression that there is some more forward thinking. Voting is required, and it's a Sunday always, and it's a big deal. So that was also interesting. Any other questions? If you've got to go, please feel like you can go and yeah.
When I was younger, most of my life, I was not younger now.
I think that's true of all of us. Yeah.
Some 40, 50 years ago,
Yeah.
there was a strong movement in the Catholic Church in Central and South America called
Liberation theology. Yeah.
Is it still alive?
Well, I am not an expert on the Catholic Church. I will say the Pope is known for being a liberation theologian. I don't know how much within the sort of standard day-to-day life of the Catholics there that the liberation theology has made an impact. It's not something I explored. And the people that I was talking theology with were all Reformed. So, sorry, I don't really know. Jeff, you don't know either, do you? Or you don't?
I know that liberation theology is alive and well in some parts of the world, in Central America especially, but I'm with you. I didn't see too many signs of it.
No, not for like day-to-day life. Anything else? Yeah, Jan, you.
Sort of what did you find any houses?
No, we were not in that area. We would have had to travel to where those hippos are.
Escobar,
Yeah.
he had this huge private zoo. He brought in animals from all over the world, including a pack of hippopotamuses. And when he was gone, they just sort of
Now there's a real hippo problem. And for real, they're destroying the ecology and they don't really know what to do with them. I think it's just been recently decided they're going to try to sterilize them all. Because people don't want, it's like deer or whatever. People don't want them to be killed, but they're actually sort of ruining the life in the river. So what are you going to do? So we're trying to figure that out. Allie.
I just wanted to say really quickly before everybody leaves that next week we're actually going back to Ecuador.
Oh yeah, the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, we will try to
Yes.
bring him out a little bit because he's not a big talker, but.
Yeah, and Bob has a completely different experience. Mine was mainly as a tourist and living in the city, and Bob's experience is a completely different style. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the Spanish in your life.
Yeah.
What are you feeling like you're more strong now and have any ideas about that?
Yes, I was definitely more strong when I left.
Yeah.
I, for many, many weeks, was like, I'm going to really work on this. I had a tutor that I met with online for a good long time. I watch mainly TV in Spanish. So that's the one thing that I'm committed to is almost all the TV watching, with the exception of the Great British Baking Show, is in Spanish. And then I have Duolingo on my phone, and I do a Duolingo before I go to bed every night. I also am at this moment, like literally this morning, looking to see, I get some study leave as part of my compensation here. I'm hoping to do another immersion, not for 3 weeks, but maybe for one next summer, which will make me keep up my Spanish. And also we're going to Mexico with the youth, so I'm trying to keep it up. I can understand. And then a lot of it is when I don't speak it, I forget the vocabulary. And then it's like reaching for words all the time that are basic words that you should know. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you notice, and I didn't know this until I saw PBS, which I love that channel, of the African Odyssey also in Colombia? And it may be throughout,
It's
but I was
throughout.
shocked.
Yes. It's
I was like, whoa.
I felt very kind of like dumb. Because when I got there, yes, there are a lot of people of African descent, particularly in Medellin, not so much in Cuenca, and Black Spanish speakers all over the place. It's very, very
I've
interesting.
met some people from Ecuador living in Boston, and I think they're beautiful people. Beautiful people.
Well, I will just be up here for a few more minutes if you have any other questions, and
Thank you,
go in
Emily.
peace to love.